Under the arms like this. Go pop switch. We go behind the back. Remember that we got a stretch in the morning. Very good. Then we go nice and high. Okay? Nice and high. Little spins, little spins. Double spin.
Fringe is unique,
powerful,
exciting,
an adventure.
I think it's people coming together.
It allows everybody and anybody to have a go.
Even some shows you'll come across and you'll be like, I did not even know there was a market for that show.
The arts have always been there, particularly theatre has always been there for me at the difficult times.
I always have that desire of being a performer, but you're deaf. How are you going to be able to do that?
How can you direct as a blind person?
I simply can't get into the venue.
I've got to look at it, almost assume that I can't get in.
Spontaneity is very difficult within the Fringe.
They had a disabled toilet that was down 2 flights of stairs.
The interpreter is normally put on one side of the stage. I feel like I'm watching a bit of a tennis match.
When I experience these barriers, it makes me feel sad.
Frustrated.
Uneasy.
Deflating.
But sadly not surprised.
Accessibility, it can become part of the artistic process.
It's trying to bridge the gap between the two different worlds, the hearing and the deaf worlds.
What would happen if there was a blind Hamlet or a King Lear who was deaf?
Talk to us, let us know what you already have, and we'll let you know what we need, and we can hopefully meet somewhere in the middle.
I'm Michelle, I'm a producer. I have limited mobility and it's my Fringe too.
I'm Leah, I'm a stand-up comedian, I'm deaf, and it's my Fringe too.
I'm Alison, I'm a director, I'm blind, and it's my Fringe too.
I'm Neil, I'm a musician, I'm a full-time wheelchair user, and it's my Fringe too.
Everyone
has the right
to experience
live performance.
Fringe stands for freedom. The freedom to take part, making a start, telling your story, whoever you are. It's for the risk takers, rule breakers, name makers, artists and audience alike, a place to discover and to be discovered. It's an international showcase, meeting place, creative space where anything goes and the world comes to find it. A global stage made in Scotland. An idea so nonsensical no one could explain it. Copy, own, predict or contain it. A complex design with human heart, ever-changing and state-of-the-art. The Fringe is groundbreaking, mischief-making, shaping conversations but never taking itself too seriously. Its birth was an act of defiance and it will never be shushed. It begins and ends with Edinburgh. It closes in taverns, venues in caverns, and waiting in line for a show. That feeling of belonging in a crowd of perfect strangers. The Fringe that calls Edinburgh home.
Hello, and welcome to today's Fringecast. We are on episode 5 of the series, and today we are talking about budgeting your Fringe show. Aren't we, Daniel?
Yes.
So, hello everyone. For those who are watching along, which Daniel will explain how that's all going to work just in a sec, you'll see there's only the two of us today because we're going to be joined by our lovely colleagues through lots of different video clips. So you get a chance to really meet the team and kind of see how we can help with all the ideas, aspects of budgeting, and then sort of doing a show in general. So I guess it's always nice to introduce ourselves to start. So for those who don't know, hi, I'm Alan. I'm the registration manager here at the Fringe Society.
Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm the digital marketing coordinator here at the Fringe Society, so I work in our marketing team. And as promised, it's episode 5, and we finally welcomed our editor and sound technician, Leah, to be on shot just about.
Yeah, we've even given you your... So we're not quite let you fully on screen, but we're giving you your own microphone.
The camera slightly slipped down before we went live, so we're just going to run with it. And there's an empty space here because earlier today, we caught up with various members of the participant services team, and we pre-recorded some small discussions with them. But we are coming to you live, and we'll be here live throughout the duration of this episode. So if you're on YouTube and you're watching the YouTube episode live, that live chat that we talk about in every episode is the perfect place to send questions our way. And whilst we can't put them to the guys we're chatting to, we'll answer whatever we can in the live chat. Or at the end of the episode, Alan and I will just have a chat and try and tackle everything that's sprung to mind.
Yeah, it's gonna come back to us after all the clips. So you're definitely gonna get a lot of Alan, Daniel time and Leah time. So it's really good to have those questions. Fringecasts work best when they're interactive and we can hear from you. They're about helping you and helping you kind of disentangle everything to do with the Fringe. So please get in touch. We're incredible. For anyone who goes through Fringecasts a lot, we're sitting in different places and it is massively stressing me out.
But if you're not watching live, but you're watching YouTube, you don't feel like you have to miss out. So you can get in touch with us by emailing fringecast@edfringe.com or tweeting using #Fringecast. And another way you can get involved is to listen to the episodes as their podcast edition if you feel like catching up on the go. So if you just search for Fringecast in your major podcast providers, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you can subscribe and it'll let you know once our new episodes are available. We'll be making this episode available to download some point tomorrow, we hope.
Yep. So I guess a final bit of intro is just to say this episode talks about budgeting, but you really, if you've not seen the rest of the series, we've got 2 episodes, should you do the Fringe, and how to do the Fringe, and also one on like what venues are looking for, as well as if you're an international listener or viewer about coming from overseas. And I genuinely think this episode is best listened to after those and in conjunction with them, because it'll link up more.
So shall we look at what we're covering
Yeah,
today?
what are we covering today?
So today, hopefully popped on screen, we're going to cover quite a lot of things in that short space of time, as is the tradition in Fringecasts.
Wow.
So kicking off with the basics of the ways we can help, and then repeating a couple of topics that are kind of ever present in these Fringecast episodes about how to do your research and how to pick your venue. And then we'll get into why you're all here, hopefully, about making your budget, how accommodation factors into part of that, how you can incorporate accessibility and sustainability into your budget, and then bringing it home at the end, we'll look at some ways you can generate revenue for your shows, such as through fundraising, sponsorship, and crowdfunding, wrapping it all up by telling you what episodes we've got coming up in 2020 now. This is the last episode of 2019. The year has flown by. So it will be 2020 very soon, the year of the Fringe.
Exciting. So I guess without further ado, we're going to let you listen to our chats with
Some
our
of the
colleagues
chats.
from earlier.
Let's see how that goes.
And we are now joined by my lovely colleague, Eleanor. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Eleanor and I'm the participant support assistant. So I work with the venues and company team. We are the ones who look after all the venues and the performing companies that come to the Fringe.
And I think a small claim to fame in the Fringecast world, we have said the email participants@edfringe.com many times throughout the series. It's a very important email address. It's a very good first point of call. How is that relevant to you, Eleanor?
Well, that one goes basically straight to me and my team. So it's usually me who answers all those emails, or if I'm not there, it's my colleagues.
Yeah, so it's not like someone thinks sometimes it's a massive team. Actually, there's a team of 3 of you, and you're the front line of that team.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So I think this is a really good time for us to establish who we are. You know us now, but we work for the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society. Now, we're the charity that underpins the Fringe Society, which means it's not necessarily, we don't manage the Fringe, we don't program the Fringe, because the Fringe is an open access festival. Can you talk a bit about what that means, Ellie?
Yeah, it's a kind of confusing term, but essentially it means that it's uncurated. So there's no centralised committee that decides who can and cannot participate. Anyone who has a story to tell and can find a space to perform it in can. So it's essentially, we're here as a society to help guide and advise and support those who want to and don't really know how to go about it or have any specific questions along the way.
Yeah, and one thing, apart from the fact that we always like to establish who the Fringe are and the fact that the Fringe Society doesn't, we're not some big managing body, but how would you say that that's relevant to people when they're thinking about budgeting, like the fact that we're open access?
Well, and kind of contrast to loads of other festivals in the world that are curated, we don't pay any shows to come to perform with us, and there's no real fundraising body that gives that money just for shows coming, particularly to the Edinburgh Fringe.
So if you're used to going to festivals where they give you a fee to come and bring your work,
One of the most common questions we get through social media is, can you invite us to perform? And I guess the answer is yes, because everyone is invited to perform, but it's not like we are hand-picking shows to be part of it.
So that's, I suppose, the first hurdle really, to get kind of why it's important to do as much research as possible, find out how the Fringe works, and to talk to other Fringe participants, form participants, about what their budget was, what the costs were for them, because it's just there's no such thing as a typical Fringe show.
Yeah.
There's therefore no real way we can say, oh, it's definitely going to be between this amount and that amount. It can go from, you can choose a venue that costs nothing to something that costs several £1,000s. You might have production costs that are sky high compared to someone else bringing a one-man show. So there's just so many components that go into your budget, which is why it's important, and we ask everyone, to do speak with us, but of course do research amongst others. What did they, what were their costs?
So I feel like we've beautifully segued from who we are to the research angle, which is like every single Fringe cast we talk about doing your research, and it's so important because the fact that shows are self-producing the vast majority of the time at the Fringe, meaning that you're the one who makes every decision. I'd say like when it comes to a budget, that's so important because there's no one doing anything for you, I guess.
Yeah, so you're supposed to both anticipate what expenses could be, as well as applying for the funding and doing all that yourself. It can be a bit daunting, but we have some tools on our website, and I know Matt's coming in a bit later. My colleague coming in a bit later to talk about that in a bit more detail. But there are we have some suggestions, of kind of short list of things you need to consider. But there could be, and please be aware that there could be always things above that could be very particular to your show that you need to consider, and just try and be as realistic as possible, I suppose.
Totally, and I guess can't say enough that participants@edfringe.com email address. See, even if you've got like a really small concern about like, oh, should I budget for this? The answer's there. It's in the take part section of our website. But also, don't feel bad about just dropping us an email. And we'd much rather an email like that come in where Ellie can answer that within a minute to just being like, here's your answer, and it puts you on the right sort of journey. I guess you touched a little bit on this already, but I think it's worth us reiterating. I think probably all of us get asked like a certain amount of times, it comes through in Fringecast all the time, how much will it cost to do the Fringe, or what's a typical budget? There isn't one, is there?
No, not really. We tend to say how long is a piece of string, really. It depends so much on so many variables for everyone. So, I mean, infuriatingly, you can't really say it's going to be this amount. It could be anything from, a few £100 if you're local to, £10,000, depending. It just depends on so many variables.
And it's almost it's frustratingly for a podcast that's meant to help people with their journey to the Fringe. For most questions, there isn't one answer. Like you said at the top, the only thing that Fringe shows have in common is that they're completely different to each other.
Exactly. Hence why it's important when you, before starting anything, planning to come to the Fringe, is to ask yourself why you're coming.
Oh, absolutely.
And that question, I suppose you guys have brought up several times already.
Yeah, because it genuinely, though, like, I'm glad you said it, because it's true. Like, why you're coming to the Fringe will affect how you spend your money. It affects all your decisions. But, for example, if one of the things you want is you really want press and media, a publicist might be something you look for. Whereas actually, if you're looking for like quite large scale touring, trying to like get those big high scale theatres interested in your work, maybe it's really important to you that then the production values. So like it literally will affect how you spend your money. Exactly, yeah. No, it will affect, and what venue you go with. Does the venue have a media office that can help promote your show more than what your listings with us do? Yeah, and I hope that's now covered. Like lots of people, like, we're never trying to like frustrate or disguise how much things cost. It's generally because there's so many variables that it just wouldn't be worth an answer. And there's that additional factor on top of everything, which we mentioned in most episodes, is that as an impartial organisation, we also can't even recommend a specific venue or a specific service. Yeah. So again, if we could do that, we would know the set costs of various things. Totally. But because we have to give you all options equally, it really is up to you to pick your options, and your budget is one of the main factors that will help you make that decision. And also why, like, sorry to sound like a broken record, but why we say get in touch with us if you've got something specific. Like, so an open question like, how much does it cost to do the Fringe? We can't answer. But if someone gets in touch with you, Eileen, is like, okay, I'm looking to do free Fringe on this scale, then suddenly you can start showing them more examples. Exactly. We do have some case studies on our website that I'm sure, well, maybe Matt will talk about later. I shouldn't suppose anything, but that will give me a bit more framework what to go on. And also, if there's a question about budget or anything else that I don't know the answer to, I could, everything from asking around colleagues who might know more. We also have, loads of external resources where you would get that answer from. Be that contacting the venue directly or a insurance provider that will give you a better idea of what that part of things will cost. We can give you those details, so do not feel afraid to get in touch with me, really. And I guess from the early start point of like when we're talking about budgets and research, I guess the most important thing is to have one. Yeah, it's easy to assume that, it's actually my least favourite part in life, really. Yeah. I'm not really good with budgets, so I would say,
ardently, please do, and try and be as realistic as possible. Think about worst case scenario, and just kind of do a list and go through every little thing that could be an expense for you, and think that it might happen. You know, better to be prepared than sorry later on.
Oh my god, absolutely. Like, I can't agree more with what Ellie said. And that also, I hate budgeting, and budgeting was probably one of my weakest aspects going into doing my first show. But no, if you're rubbish at budgeting and you hate it, all the more reason to do it, and to do it early, because the August comes around, and the one thing the Fringe can provide is surprises, and you're never going to know what's up. So if you've got that set and you know what you're doing, and you've done that planning and research, you're saving yourself potentially some like heartache or problems down the line.
Tackle your least favourite things first, and then give you more time to do stuff that you enjoy, which I hope is producing your show. If it's not, then maybe. If you don't enjoy producing your show, maybe don't do it.
Yeah, and also like you can, you know, of course we encourage everyone to start with a budget just to give them an idea of what they can afford, and then you just revise it later on, and you might feel different about it when you do it later on, you know, later in the spring or early summer, and just go, look, what have I spent? What can I already foresee might be a possible expense? And you know, it will perhaps make it less daunting, and also you feel more prepared to do the Fringe and really enjoy it and achieve those goals that you set out to achieve.
I think that's a really good point as well. It doesn't have to be set in stone.
No.
So just because you make one, it probably shouldn't be something that's unchanging. It should move and flow with you, but as long as you've got that you can refer back to. Well, thank you, Eleanor. That was great for our first portion of today's episode. Thank you for joining us for your debut Fringecast.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye. So now we have a new guest with us. Welcome, Matt.
Hello.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name's Matt. I'm the Participant Projects Coordinator.
And those who listened to our last episode will recognise those dulcet tones, Matt. But what is it you do?
So I work as part of the Participant Services team, and I guess in a nutshell, it's just giving advice to performing companies and to venues about all the logistics of putting on a show as part of the Fringe.
That's pretty seamless, because venues is actually what I wanted to start the discussion on today.
Sure.
So I'm just going to pose that as a question. How important, how much of an impact on your budget does your venue choice?
Yeah, well, so I'd say in terms of the cost, your venue will typically be one of the biggest costs, probably along with your accommodation, generally speaking. I mean, obviously it's quite a complex thing. It really depends on the kind of venue you're in and everything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're paying for a venue, if you're doing a full run at the Fringe, that can be the biggest part of your budget in general.
Yeah, and I guess the reasons why you would choose a certain venue we have already covered, so people should look into that specifically.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we've already done that episode that goes into a lot more detail, but I think in terms of the budgeting side of it specifically, what you're paying for will influence what you're paying your venue for will influence how much you potentially will have to pay for other parts of your budget. For example, you know, if your venue has a media office and as part of your agreement with them, you're getting loads of great, you know, marketing support, and that could be in terms of flyering, or it could be in terms of their own venue program and any arrangements they have with other, you know, promoters, marketing companies in Edinburgh. Then obviously that will impact potentially how much you will want to spend on marketing independently.
Yeah.
And whereas if you're with a venue that doesn't do any of that, and you've got you know, an idea in your head of how much you want to promote your show in the city, that you wouldn't be able to just do independently in and of by yourself.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting how to speak.
But it's true. It's one of those that, so actually paying more somewhere could save you money at other points in your budget.
Yeah, I think yes. I also think it's a really complicated thing, and it comes back to that question we always talk about, which is why you're doing the Fringe, and that will inform both which venue you go to and how valuable certain services at a venue are, because you don't want to be in a venue that has loads and loads of support and resources that you have no interest in, and that won't really impact the success of your show, because the success is so dependent on you specifically.
Yeah. So the other place I think your venue, as well as the actual cost, affects how your budget works is the model that you choose to go with.
Sure.
Because it'll depend when the money goes out and may come back. So I wonder if you can talk a bit on that.
Yeah, yes, certainly. So there's lots of different venue models, and there's a few kind of basic kinds of model. I think it's often not as simple as I'm about to explain it as. It does just depend specifically what's in your contract and how that arrangement has been negotiated.
And always check with your venue, because as Matt says, everything's unique, so don't assume anything. That's our disclaimer.
So it's kind of be very aware of how it's framed in your contract, and if you don't understand how it's framed in your contract in terms of any money or any kind of hire arrangement and what the specifics of that are, then get in touch with us, or speak to the venue directly and say you don't understand specific parts. But in terms of the specific kind of models, I keep saying the word specific. I'm sorry about that.
That's a brave choice. So, I can't say it the best of times.
So I guess the simplest is just a straight hire fee, and that would be you pay X amount of money, and for that you get the venue space for an allotted time, and that can be as simple as your arrangement is. It might be the case that the contract you have is one paragraph long, and it just says you're giving us £100 and you're getting the space on Tuesday. Their contracts can be that simple, but similarly, even that kind of hire model can become more complicated. There can be add-on fees if you're using specific services at the venue. Maybe you're using a technician, something like that. So that will impact it. Another thing to think about in terms of the straight hire is exactly how much you're paying from the off, and it really simplifies that, generally speaking. So that's one of the positive sides of the straight hire.
And I guess traditionally with the straight hire, the tickets remain yours. So the income coming back, okay, everything is coming back to me.
Yeah, and again, that kind of comes back to just making sure that's what it says in your contract. And normally that will be the case with the straight hire. You get all the money from the box office. Sometimes there might be a small commission that a venue box office takes. There's obviously a commission with the Fringe box office tickets. But yeah, as you say, with the straight hire, generally speaking, you would get all the ticket revenue beyond maybe the odd commission fee or something.
So then I guess the more complex agreement would be what we call a box office split, or a box office split with a guarantee.
Sure, yeah. So that's when your hire arrangement is determined by how many tickets you sell, basically. So you will say to the venue that you want, in your contract it will be stated that for the use of the space you are giving 60% or 40% or however many percent of the revenue to your venue. The most standard percentage would probably be 60-40 in favor of the company, but it does just change, and it doesn't mean it's a bad deal if it's less or more than that you're getting. It's all relevant. It's all relative to the specific services and the way that venue works. So that's the split. And then you mentioned the split with the guarantee, which is probably maybe slightly more common with some of the larger venue operators. And the way that works is you have an agreed amount that you've basically said to the venue you're going to pay them regardless of what your ticket revenue reaches. So if, for example, you've agreed to give them £1,000 and your box office split is 60% to you, 40% to the venue, if the 40% that's due to them doesn't reach £1,000, you still give them that. And the way it can work in a more complex way where you might just get the rest of the money, or the split might kick in after that £1,000 amount has been reached. It does become a wee bit complicated when it's like that, and working out which one applies to you can be a bit tricky. So again, just get in touch if you're not sure.
So is it fair to say with that model you may not have as big a upfront cost, sort of pre-August in there, but you'll get that cost down the line?
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, again, I'll keep saying it probably for the next few minutes. It depends on the venue. Some will have an amount of money you have to pay in advance. Some won't. And then the way in which the revenue comes back to you can be affected by different things. There can be extra charges on top of the percentages. There can be things like commissions and various other stuff that can impact what you're getting. So yeah, my main advice is just be really aware of what the arrangement is, so there's no cost that kind of comes out of nowhere that surprises you. And that really, it does happen if people aren't careful to just make sure they understand it all.
I also want to do a little bit of a callback to something we've said, I think, in multiple episodes, which is about when you're choosing your venue, contacting multiple. We say contact about 7 to 10, but you contact venues on different models. so as you can compare and contrast and see which one is right for you.
Yeah, I think definitely that will give you a sense of what a good deal is and what a good deal isn't. I would also say though is those deals are all quite different. So being aware how it impacts you. So for example, we haven't mentioned the free model venues yet. I wouldn't necessarily be both really interested in going with a free model venue and with a box office split or a straight high venue, because they're quite different ways of operating, and kind of makes a big decision like that early on. But to explain a little bit about how the free model venues work, is that's a case of you getting in touch with one of the, generally there's two free model venue operators, PBH's Free Fringe and Laughing Horse Comedy, and they operate out of lots of different pubs and clubs that exist year round in Edinburgh. And they essentially have an agreement with those pubs and clubs where they program work into them or into a room in those venues, and then they essentially, you know, have an application form that you can fill in and apply to be part of their program. And the cost, if there is one with those organisations, is you know, pretty small, or it's not really related directly to the hire of the venue. It's related more to the marketing and the support you're getting from those venue operators. So that's, you know, a more affordable route into having a venue in the Fringe. But there, you know, there's advantages and disadvantages to that, just as there are with every other hire model. Basically.
There's one last model that's kind of the newest, I guess, which is the pay what you want model, which is kind of that mix. How would you say that affects the budget? To me, it's kind of like a way of a combo.
So I guess we'll be going a wee bit into the budget side in a minute, with specifics, you know, costs beyond the actual hire fee of the venue. I'd say the pay what you want model is a less defined one in terms of how you pay the venue, because it's relative to the specific venue. There are you know, there are venues that are essentially straight hire venues that operate on a pay what you want ticketing system, and then there are venues that are kind of, you know, free venues essentially that also have a pay what you want ticketing system. In terms of budgeting and including pay what you want in your budget, it's kind of a difficult thing to quantify. I mean, it depends on, for example, the capacity of the venue you're going to be in. If you're asking for a donation at the end of every show and you're in a 20 capacity venue, then you'll probably get less than if you're in a 50%. But again, that depends on how popular your show is, because if you've got 5 people in a 50 capacity venue, then, you know, you're obviously not going to make as much as someone with 20 in a 20 capacity. So when people ask, I mean, I guess that comes down to more the bigger question of how to factor in your ticket revenue into your budget and how that impacts things. And you know, I think if you sell a third of your tickets at the Fringe, like, we would consider that a really good, successful run at the Fringe. But we also, you know, as we'll talk about in a minute, you know, it's important to have a contingency in your budget to account for things not going to plan in certain ways.
I was just going to say that when it comes to those other models, another consideration to bear in mind is the cash flow and where the money comes in. So if you're doing a free show and you're collecting donations, that's money in your hat on the moment. But with pay what you want, the idea is that people can buy a ticket to secure a space and they can add a donation later. So you get some money on the day. But if you're going for maybe a straight hire or a split, the money comes a lot later in the process, doesn't it?
And sometimes a company can be quite surprised how long it takes them for the revenue to reach them. And that's also from our, you know, we don't immediately give you your money as soon as someone buys a ticket. That there's a lot of process that has to happen there because of the number of shows that we're ticketing. And then that's kind of exacerbated by if your venue is wanting to get the money first because of part of your arrangement is, for example, they deduct a percentage or they take their own charges from that, then that's going to be delayed. So it might be the case that you don't even get paid until the end of November. You know, we have companies that have been paid relatively recently by their venues, and, you know, now is quite a late point, but it's still not completely unheard of. So again, look at your contract, see when that money is going to actually get to you, and just take that into consideration when you're thinking about the financial side.
I feel like this is a really nice time to sort of sum up this section with kind of the message that seems to have come through everything we've been talking about is there's a multitude of different factors and variables. So actually the most important thing is to, when you're reaching that agreement, of knowing exactly what those parameters are. So as when you do then come to plan your budget, which we're about to talk about, you've got the solid there. You know what your venue expects. You know how your ticketing is going to work.
Yeah.
And you're in a solid place to start.
Totally.
Your budget.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it all comes down to doing your research. You know, like a lot of these things do.
The R word keeps coming up.
So yeah, read your contract. Make sure you understand how the venue works in terms of the higher fees, and get in touch with us if you're not sure.
Cool. So a budget. We're gonna make one. What goes into a budget?
Yeah, well, it's a big question.
There's lots.
Guess what? It depends on the show.
Yeah.
You know, some budgets will be more complex than others because some shows are more complex than others. You know, we've mentioned things like accommodation and venue. Like these are obviously going to be the bigger parts of your budget for sure. There's also, you know, living costs, production costs. There's, you know, insurance and legal. So, you know, for example, if you're using someone else's, if you're performing someone else's play, you know, you're going to have to potentially pay to do that. And these kinds of things can be overlooked. You know, the registration fee with us, it does kind of mount up. So
that's a good point. So the registration fee with us, that's the one time we will directly ask artists for money. It's good to know if it very much depends on how many performances of your show you're doing. Your fee changes depending on the run, but if you are doing a full run, so that's anything 6 or more performances, it's worth noting that we have an early bird discount. So if you can get your show in registered by that date, you save around £100, and that's just sensible budgeting.
Yeah, so I guess we've got a few resources on our website that can help you navigate it, and you know, it's not really a case that I can kind of sit here and say these are the 10 things that should be on your budget, because as we say, every show is different. But we do have lists of things to think about when you're putting together your budget, and if you contact us on participants@edfringe.com, I can direct you to the appropriate part of the website. We have a budget calculator which has a few kind of general categories that you can put stuff into, and just it auto calculates. But yeah, you can put it in there, and it will work out how much the total is meant to be. As I mentioned, the contingency is on there, and that's an important part of it. We also have some case studies of budgets that basically list the specific amounts that some companies have paid. There's loads of caveats to them because there's no typical costs when it comes to the Fringe. Like there's no typical show, there's no typical venue. But the biggest question we get asked, often we get asked it specifically with venue or accommodation, how much does this cost? And we can't answer that, but at least,
this has come up already. We're like, this is an impossible question.
Something like the case studies at least do give you a few specific amounts that can give you a really basic ballpark figure when you're at the very early stage, and then from that you can get a bit more specific when the actual costs that are kind of, you know, all about your show start to make a bit more sense and get a bit clearer.
So those
if you haven't already, episode 4 is all about performing at the Fringe from overseas. So those budgets, there are additional considerations you need to take into account. If you're not from the United Kingdom when bringing a show, and again, we haven't got time to touch on them today, but the episode just for this one is 50 minutes, all about those different details that could impact your budget as well.
Yeah, and you know, and on the case studies, we give a bit of information about what the individual show was that all those costs apply to. So there's, you know, an example, I think there's like a Chinese company there, for example, that's going to have a much bigger budget than the others in terms of the travel expenses, you know, alone. You know, that's a big cost that the UK companies don't really have to worry about so much. But if you're coming from overseas, especially if you have a big company, then that becomes one of the biggest costs in the budget as a whole.
So those case studies really offer at least a range of different levels.
I'd have a look at them as a kind of introduction to the kinds of amounts that companies use, and then not put too much value on the specific amounts, but just to get a sense of the kinds of costs that companies do have to pay.
And I think I feel like we've covered this quite extensively without going into the type of detail that wouldn't be worthwhile. But the last thing I wanted to just flag up, you've said it already, that contingency word.
Yeah.
I don't think we can overstate how important that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just good practice generally,
Yeah.
and I think most people would include that in some way, even if it wasn't a specific figure,
Yeah.
you know, by overestimating certain amounts. But yeah, as we say, it's just an important consideration because the Fringe can have these little surprises within it, and that can come in many different forms. So having a security, you know, a backup there is really something that could come in handy.
Yeah, I always say like the first time I did a show, my contingency helped from my lack of research because public liability insurance was just something that I hadn't fully looked into, and it was something the venue required, and I hadn't budgeted, but actually the contingency then took the pressure of that, and I was like, okay, things are still pretty much on track.
Sure, and it's often
example.
things like public liability insurance, and people hear the word insurance and think that's going to be like a huge amount of money. It's not always. It's really not that
It's
much.
really not.
It's
I was
pretty
scared
cheap.
when I figured out I'd forgotten it.
And we have links with us. Well, we've kind of negotiated a couple of Fringe specific packages with some insurance providers that are linked to on our website. It's not like we kind of recommend you go with them, but we've spoken to them and they have packages for Fringe performers, so they at least know who you are if you get in touch with them and say you want to take out an insurance coverage with them.
So we're going to pull out accommodation as a factor to talk about later on in the episode.
Yeah.
But one of the only things I want to go into specific bit is kind of, you mentioned living costs.
Sure.
And I think it's worth people really taking that serious. I think it's something you can underestimate when you're planning your budget and thinking about practical things. But actually, Edinburgh in August, if you're going to do it and experience other shows, can be fairly expensive.
Yeah, definitely, and it comes down to who you are and how you approach the month. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be positive in any way for you to be like out all the time, spending loads of money all the time. But the festival is a really exciting environment to be in, and it does end up in you being on unexpected night outs, for example. So yeah, living costs, absolutely. But I would hope that most people would have a sense of how much they generally spend in a day anyway, and kind of use that as a rough guide.
You don't want to go. Daniel, you're very clever at you plan your ticket budget.
I build my budget over the course of the year because I know once August comes along, I can't help but wanting to see everything and anything.
Daniel's your annoying friend that when you can't afford it, he's like, well, I've been budgeting since January, so here you go. I'm like, wow, I should have done that. Great, Matt, thank you very much for all of your budgeting knowledge.
No problem.
And now we're joined today by our final guest, my lovely colleague Kevin. Do you want to introduce yourself, Kevin?
Yes, hello everyone. My name's Kevin. I'm the Participant Projects Manager at the Fringe Society.
Yeah, and with Kevin, you've now met all three people on the other end of the participants at edfringe.com email address, so you know who you're emailing when you get in touch. Kevin, I'm going to talk to you today about accommodation at the Fringe. We've spoken about budget and all the things that can be involved, and I think there's a reason why we're bringing this out to talk about specifically, because it's quite a big cost and it's something that we are actively trying to be involved in the conversation with, I guess.
Definitely. So you just want me to elaborate on that, on what we're doing?
Very much. I didn't ask you a question then, I just made a statement. So how are the Fringe sort of tackling the accommodation issue, and how does that affect how participants should get in touch with us?
Well, certainly the Fringe Society for years has had some form of resource. It was very much about signposting, and last year we trialled successfully, I may add, just a section of our website that was devoted specifically to accommodation and to accommodation listings. So not acting quite as a letting agent, but being there as a place where anyone that we've engaged with to talk about accommodation, the accommodation listed on that page would be set at £250 per week per person, and no more than that. So the resource that we currently have, which you can have a look at on our website, it's live all year long, so there's no time period on it. The properties listed there are go up and down, are obviously more available in the lead up to the Fringe. So there won't be the vast amount that you might expect if you go visit there now.
And not panic if you go in there. When there's
yes, certainly. We're about to relaunch a bit of work that we're doing with our marketing team to try and engage more hosts in Edinburgh. But essentially, to sort of put a base on how we started this, we approached a number of different accommodation providers in the city, a big one being student halls of residence across the different universities. So we managed to negotiate some very affordable accommodation within that, some of it within the city centre, some of it out with the city centre, but certainly deals included with that are rehearsal time, the use of gym and spa and pool facilities, and just having a look at that for what you want in terms of accommodation is a good thing to think about. Are you a single person looking for a single room, and are you happy to share that single room with maybe 10 other people? Or are you a troupe of people coming over to Edinburgh looking for a place that you'll have as a home base? So that it all varies and it's all different, and do take a look at what's on offer. But there's various kinds of rooms that are basically set up not as dorms as such, but more looking at individual rooms that are en suite that share a common room and share a kitchen. So you can pretty much, if you're a troupe of 6 to 8 people, or maybe even more if you want to spread that across a few different rooms, you can have a look at that as being your home base. That also includes a shop nearby, that includes rehearsal space, that includes gym facilities, that has that sort of, I guess, area for you to not just reflect and take a step back and enjoy the Fringe, but also to reconnect with each other, which is much harder to do when you're spread across 16 different properties all over the Fringe, all in various locations. So I think that's a really, really beneficial part to it.
And it's good that you say that some are in the city centre and some are further out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true to say that I say this in every episode.
We're
It's
so
kind
in
of a
sync.
plug.
This is literally what I bring up.
Not to be put off by what you may perceive to be really far out the city centre. It's worth checking out that journey time and see how quick it is to get in the centre. And actually maybe being away from the bubble and the noise and excitement may be the kind of thing you actually need. If that you're the kind of person that in between performances just need that downtime, it may suit you to not stay in the city centre itself.
Yeah, most definitely. So me and a few of my colleagues who've done follow-up with the experience last year of not just participants using that kind of accommodation, but also the providers' experience, and they really enjoyed having that sort of Fringe atmosphere in their part of Edinburgh, which is, in one case, literally a 7-minute train journey, which when you think of any sort of commute situation, if you want to take London as an example, is an absolute dream. So that 7-minute journey takes you outside the city centre, you're in the countryside, you've got fields around you, but you've still got a shop. You've got, as I said, all those other facilities, but you've got, in some cases, a bar as well. So having a look at that as a bit of a respite from the Fringe and a place to reconnect is a benefit if that's what you want.
Yeah, I would say in that situation, if you are staying a little bit further afield and you maybe don't want to do lots of back and forward, that's when Fringe Central really comes into its own. We haven't talked about Fringe Central this episode, so I should probably establish that that's our performers hub during the Fringe, and it's created as a space where there's many different events and our teams that you can engage with, but also at the same time it's somewhere where you can literally just drop down and drop in and relax and actually chat and reconnect and meet other artists necessarily,
and not have to make that journey back and forth all day long. Another thing that I should mention is beyond the university halls of residence, we've also looked at a platform called Theatre Digs Booker, which I think you may or may not be familiar with, but their model is based very, very similarly on an Airbnb type of model, but it's the host is coming from a more altruistic point of view than anything else, and they're looking for the same sort of experience that an Airbnb situation would give to someone dropping into, to use your term, dropping into a city they've never visited and experiencing that from a local's point of view. This is very much a reciprocal situation with Theatre Digs Booker, where you've got hosts who are, oh yes, I'd love to have my property ready for the Fringe and host an artist, and they're looking to have that experience. And it doesn't mean that they're going to take up all your time, but they just want to experience that from a different point of view. And there's been great relationships that have been formed out of that as well, with the limited research that we've been able to do and get back at this point in time.
So to sum up, to bring accommodation to a close, I guess it's just that aspect of, yes, accommodation is an expensive and a substantial part of your budget all the time, but if you do your research, there are options available to you, and it's about finding, I guess, the one that works best for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you have to, obviously there's lots of different things to consider, but the time you want to start doing that, I would say, is as soon as possible, but don't jump on anything. So I've got reports back of conflicting information, which I don't know how to turn into one piece of thing, one piece of information that is, a direct route that everyone should take, because I don't think there's ever an answer like that on the Fringe anyway for anything you want to do. But lots of people say get in as early as possible. Other people say wait a little bit. Lots of things get freed up closer to the Fringe, and to not panic too much about that, because there are still resources available. And as I said, there were rooms and there was availability on our platform for the limited amount that it was actually able to accommodate. There was still availability up until and during the Fringe. So don't worry that there will be nowhere to stay. I mean, there are so many options. You've also got other places like you can camp on the Fringe. I don't know how wonderful that would be, but for the right participant, whom I've spoken to many times, they love it and they think it's a great camaraderie that is formed in that particular campground. So I would look at that as well.
Again, it gets you out the city as well.
Yeah, and look at all your options. So it's timing, but also making sure that you know of all the options that exist, and not just thinking that linearly that one way is the only way.
And similar to, say, the chat we've had about venues, and it's not just limited to those providers you've mentioned. If in any of the cases that you've got an accommodation offer or a situation you're not sure about something, again, that email address, participants@fringe.com, you can just ask us, does this seem right? Is this location suitable? And while we are impartial, we can still answer your questions with factual answers. So don't hesitate to get in touch and run things by us.
Yeah, definitely. And I know this is the focus of budgeting specifically, but if I could add on our accommodation page as well, we've also got some guidance and top tips on making sure that you're spending your money in the right way, making deposits in the right way, making sure that you're not doing any money transfers or anything like that, that you're actually following proper protocol to make sure that if anything does go wrong, and thankfully and gratefully it very rarely does, but there is fraud out there. It's the way the world is, unfortunately. So make sure that you're safe in that way as well. We have guidance on our website.
Yeah,
for that.
I think that's a really nice way to sum it all up, because it's about being careful where you spend and how you spend, and just looking after yourself.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
You're welcome.
And we're back in the room. First off, before we continue on, I just massively want to thank our colleagues. So thank you, Eleanor, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Kevin.
So what's next?
What's next is we're going to talk about accessibility and sustainability. So it's both things, like making your show as accessible as possible and as sustainable as possible. Like in the world we're living in, those are two quite hot topics for very good reason. And I think we're not going to say a lot about them, because again, it's very much going to depend on what you're doing with your show. But I think the point we really want to make, Daniel, is about having people prepare early.
It's one of those things that often involves making adaptation to how you produce your show or how you promote your show. And in many cases, adaptations to encourage either accessibility or sustainability can actually help your budget in a positive way and actually save you costs.
Yeah. And I think the important thing is, though, if you want to do them, it shouldn't be a secondary thought. It should be something that is decided at the same point as everything else. So say you're going to adapt your show to include a BSL performance, you want to budget for that now. And our main resource for that is we've got a whole section on our website about making your show accessible, which I would absolutely encourage you to go and look through. We also have an email address, equalities@edfringe.com, which is a really good one. They speak to a lot of people who adapt their shows on a whole different range. So there's people who've found ways to do their own captioning kind of thing and integrate it in the performance. So there's lots of different options that will all cost different amounts, but I think touching base with our team who can talk you through, checking through the website, and again meeting other companies who've done similar, it's just a really good way of making sure right from the start that you're set up. So one, you don't get a budgetary surprise, but also if the accessibility or the enhancement or the adaptation is ingrained from the start, I think it's going to be more genuine and beneficial to the show.
And it's one that, like with a lot of these things, it's always good to have that conversation with your venue early about, because it may be something they have experience with, or they may be able to point you in the right direction, especially when it comes down to the specific space in your venue that you're working in. They may have experience of how they've adapted shows. Another benefit of making a show more accessible is quite a blunt one. It's a really useful marketing tool in the sense that you are welcoming a wider selection of audience into your show and giving everyone an opportunity to come and experience your show. And given that the Fringe is what we call an open access festival when anyone can perform, we also believe it's a festival where anyone should have the right to go and see and experience what live performance is all about.
Yeah, so I guess in a business sense, you're not cutting off any of your marketplace. You're essentially like open for anyone to come and enjoy the show.
And in that similar vein, sustainability, I said at the top, there could be cost savings. So one classic example is if you're, say, having to transport objects across the UK or within Scotland or around the world, often teaming up with fellow artists and sharing capacity not only reduces the amount of vehicles or whatever it is on the road or on the rails or in the planes, but it can also save you money. But it's a case of the better you plan and the more you think about it in advance, the less impact you can have on the planet, but also you have the opportunity to actually save money in your budget.
Yeah, I literally spoke to a company who they were working with Staging Change, which is an organisation that looks at sustainability at the Fringe, and because of that, they shared transport and like freight for their set, and so they literally halved what that cost would be, as well as lessening their environmental impact.
And in future episodes, we're going to be covering the various aspects of marketing and promoting your show. But another great way to both save money and think about your impact is looking at how you promote your show and looking at flyering and ensuring that trying to reduce the amount of physical paper you're putting out into the world. And we'll go into a lot more depth about that. And then also, we touched upon it in our last episode, which is aimed at artists coming from overseas, really, really avoiding, if you have to bring print, avoiding flying that around the world.
And so I used to work in our media advice team, and year on year you find people who overspend on flyers. So you end up with 2,000 flyers left that you then have to recycle or find some way to store or reuse. Why not limit that purchase right from the off?
So we'll make sure that in all the future episodes we touch upon these two topics because they're really important and they kind of have a role at every step of the journey, whether that's in the future when we talk about registering or marketing. And if you listen back to older episodes, they're all part of that whole plan for your Fringe show.
Yeah, and the plan is that we'll have episodes that focus specifically on those things because, as we say, they're very complex processes. So hopefully for now we can say check out that those sections of our website where there's online resources, but really the thought we want in your head at the moment is ingrain it from the start. Put it as part of your planning. Don't think of it as an extra that you're going to do down the line.
So as a touch upon it, the next Fringe cast coming down the line, our future Fringe cast, is Alan's favourite. It's called How to Register Your Show, which, given Alan is the registration manager, is naturally a specialist area of yours. And we're going to be going live on Tuesday, the 28th of January, 2020. It's scary, that year.
Time is flying by.
Nearly here. And as per usual, we'll be going live at 5 o'clock UK time.
But generally, if you're just finding us for the first time, I would very much encourage you to subscribe and really go back to that first episode and listen through, because these do work best as a series.
Because we can't go into everything in all the detail in each episode, because there's so much to cover, as you've probably gathered, given the amount of time we've managed just to spend on budgeting alone.
Absolutely. So, what are we wrapping up with, Daniel?
So our final topic, I thought we'd talk a bit about fundraising, sponsorship and crowdfunding. So today we've obviously talked about how you plan the amount of money you need to put on a show, but actually there's a number of ways you can help boost the budget you have available. So which shall we tackle first?
Yeah, do you know what? Let's go straight with fundraising, because this is something that when I did shows, I was quite surprised. And I even think it's relevant to looking at the Fringe Society. So obviously we're an established organisation, but we're a charity all the same. And people are quite surprised. We do things we've got an biannual pub quiz that we do to raise money. So I think one of the things is fundraising can work on many levels. So some people are absolutely, we've got advice on our website about applying for grants, applying for official public funding, which is great and can get you money that can properly set up your show. However, those are limited. They're competitive. Also, you're going to have to be really patient. You're going to have to give yourself time to do the application and then also be patient on waiting for the results coming in. So absolutely, if you're eligible for something like that, go for it. But also, if you're doing a Fringe show, chances are you're a very creative person. So be creative with your fundraising. Think of something that is relevant to what you're doing, and then find ways of working in that to making money.
I think it's very easy to underestimate how exciting it is to be bringing a show to the Fringe, and especially if you talk to people you know, whether that's friends or relatives or other people in the sector. The idea of bringing a show to the Fringe is exciting, and there's loads of different ways you can build sort of ways to raise money for that. And crowdfunding is a classic example where you can sort of lean upon those people you know and people in that wider network that can do an incredible deal. And you were saying, when you bought your own show, actually those people you don't expect, those sort of random aunts or people that live down the road who actually want to help you out.
I think if you get your crowdfunding right, it can be, well, one, both like a massive income stream, but also like the kickstart of your marketing campaign. I didn't mean to do a pun on Kickstart there, but it does. It like can get your marketing campaign off. Really, any crowdfund. There's lots of different platforms, but fundamentally for all of them, what you have to do in order to be successful is you have to tell the story of your show, the story of why you're doing the show, like because that's what's going to encourage people to like part with their cash. Like so, my story of it is. The director was the one that set up the crowdfunding, and I felt really awkward about it. I've been vocal about this like last season when we were talking. I just thought like it felt really awkward to me asking like friends and family essentially for money. But you're right, like I had no idea the kind of people who would throw money in. Like I had teachers from like high school who'd like seen it because it got shared through some network that want to get involved. The one thing I'd say is be really careful with when you're setting your incentives, like for people. Those incentives can be really something that pushes someone up into a different sort of cash category, but at the same time, you don't want to commit to something that's then going to cost you down the line.
You're promising people front row seats and a signed script, and then suddenly you want to desperately avoid that situation when what you're giving away is less than what you're getting in return.
Yeah, because you realise that, actually, my comps deal with my venue is quite limited, and there's been 15 people who we've offered them, so now we have to essentially buy those tickets to give them for free, that kind of thing.
And there's also an obvious thing to bear in mind, and all platforms do vary, but most do have this concept of you set a target, and if you achieve it, you get the money, and if you don't achieve it, you don't. So obviously being realistic and setting that target, and this sort of applies to fundraising as well, is in making sure that money is kind of additional to what you're doing. You don't live or die based on that. That can't be the core of your budget.
Fundraising for us just allowed, like for all of our basics were covered, but it just meant we could throw a bit more behind like production values, or we were able to get some additional photography done that we didn't think we'd be able to afford. But you know, we did a night of we were a new writing piece, so we managed to get a deal with a venue they could just take the money on the bar that night, and we did like a night of new writing where people who we knew, everyone did like 5 minutes and charged like a $5 to get in, and made a lot of that. And then the director was like, let's do a raffle, which I was very cynical about. And turns out people love a raffle. Like it was really easy to collect prizes because lots of like local businesses and stuff were happy to donate something because that's not a big contribution to them. And then the raffle, people got very excited. We made, and I'm sure we made like 200 quid on just the raffle. It was like, and you know what, that's not like a small amount when you're like trying to do your sums at the end.
So hopefully that was a very quick guide to how to budget your Fringe show. We've just looked at the clock, so we should probably wrap up.
I want to say something super quick.
Sure.
I promise I'll be really fast. Sponsorship.
Yes.
I think sometimes that can feel unachievable. So one thing that I think is a really realistic thing to do is to approach someone that's either relevant to the story you're telling, or in some way you want to be really clear about what you're offering. So with us, we said you can go on our flyer and you can cover the flyer cost. So rather than just being like, we want X amount of pounds, saying this is what we're offering and this is what you'd get, I think that just makes it a really simple term. So if you're thinking of sponsorship at all, find someone local or relevant to what you're doing and just offer like a really straightforward, like, we want £500. That would pay for this. This is what you'd get. And that's all I wanted to say about that.
Great. A great additional point. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Whether you've been watching this live through YouTube or you're listening to the podcast edition, I hope this was a helpful introductory guide to how to budget your Fringe show. This was episode 5 of the series. If you haven't already, make sure to catch up with previous episodes, which you can find by heading to edfringe.com/fringecast. You can also get in touch with us. How can people get in touch with us, Alan?
So I would say if you've got a question regarding like your show or how to do things, participants at edfringe.com is brilliant. If you've got a question about Fringecasts or you want to just say hello or have a request for the future, then you can email us on fringecast@edfringe.com.
Perfect. So that's it for today and for 2019, but we'll be back on Tuesday the 28th of January at 5 o'clock UK time, or we'll be starting Alan's favourite topic, how to register your show. But from us today, I want to say thank you again to Ellie, to Matt, and to Kevin, and to Alan, and to Leah for making today's episode possible. And thank you all to you guys for watching, tuning in, and listening back.
Thank you for joining us in 2019, and see you on the other side in 2020.
Goodbye.
Bye.